Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this Stornoway Historical Society lecture for this evening. Our speaker this evening is Iain Macleod, who worked within the Economic Development Department as a Corn for a significant number of years. And part of his task during that time was to service the Lews Castle Board, of which I happened to have been a member at that time. So I worked with Iain on this project. He also is a former pupil of mine and was a member of my rugby team, a very good rugby player he was too. So I've known Iain for a long time. You are all aware, of course, of the fact that the restoration of the Lews Castle was something that we were very passionately wishing to happen. It wasn't an easy task at all, as Iain will no doubt let you know, but we managed to do it, and there it is today for our enjoyment. I think that's quite enough for me just now, and I'll ask Iain to give you his lecture.
Well, thanks, Angus. I've got a few notes here, so I'm scrolling through that and this as I go along. So Muriel gave me this invitation that I couldn't refuse, or maybe you were just the messenger. I was a wee bit uncertain, out of my comfort zone and out of practice at talking to people, groups of people and so on. I've also got a large loft archive of photos and other material from the project, and I think that was quite wise given what happened with everything that was held digitally in unfortunate loss there. So I've got quite lots of photographs. I want to start by thanking my daughter Freya, who's in Glasgow, for her technical and editorial input to this, because I really was going through 20 years of involvement with the Castle project and trying to summarise it into a 1 hour, something that would be of interest over 1 hour. And a little bit more about myself, for those who maybe don't know. It's now nearly 10 years since the project was completed. It doesn't feel like that, but it is, and 6 since I retired. So just to add to Angus's kind introduction, I joined the Crown in 1979, and as a research and development assistant, it was called, in the Planning and Development Department. I retired fully in 2020, so I was a one club player with this team most all my working days. The work involved a lot of variety, and I had a spell of about 20 years working in fisheries projects before I got involved with the castle, which I didn't think would be a 10-15 year project, but it was. I have to say, the last 10 years or so working in the Castle project, 15 years I think was my favourite period. It was interesting, educational, challenging and enjoyable. And I've added a wee story here at the risk of taking up time. I think Freya wanted this one cut out, but when she was very small, about 4 years old, she came into the office for about half an hour. I was looking after the desk, so I gave her a couple of sheets of paper and some pens or crayons. And there was a desk behind, next to me. And she was working away, and I went back to my computer. We just about had them then, I think. And she came back after a while and with her drawings, and she said, "Dad, what's your job? What do you do?" And I tried to explain what economic development was, and I was struggling a bit. I would say, "Well, we try and create jobs for people and this and that." And I went on for a bit, and then she said, "It's just that I've been here for half an hour and I haven't seen you doing anything." So that was me in my place. So the castle, as it is now, or just before the wall was built, last couple of years, it really is an amazing place, we'd all agree, and a fantastic community asset. And we visited quite a number of places with historic buildings in grounds and parks, but we're a bit biased up here, but I think castle grounds are really quite special, and they're acknowledged as such. I mean, the castle was an A-listed building, and the grounds have an equivalent status as a designed landscape of outstanding value. But the castle had turned into a liability more than once in its history, as we'll talk about later. And abandonment was actually a real possibility. And in the late 80s, there were reports, before I was ever involved with it, the council were looking at options that could happen in the future. And the last option was abandonment, and leaving it as a kind of a ruin, as a backdrop to the town. And that's the kind of thing that can happen. And this here, if anyone recognises that castle, it was designed by architect David Hamilton with Charles Wilson, the architect of the castle. It's Lennox Castle, right next to Celtic's training ground in Lennoxtown, and it was abandoned as recently as 2002. It was a mental hospital with a somewhat bad reputation, and that also built of sandstone, which it possibly explains, but shows you how nature can take over so quickly. And I'm not saying the castle was anything like that, but another few years wouldn't have, and things would have got much worse. So anyway, to go on about my role, I thought this would save me quite a few words. When the project became a more formal project, you have to show the funders and lottery and other people, how is this going to be delivered and managed? And if you can read that from there, I probably had a sort of midfield role, I kind of I'm in the middle, and it meant I was connected with all aspects of the project, from the partners, and I think that was a big thing for the project, getting involved with the Stornoway Trust, the college, UHI as it is now, and so on. And then you had whole teams within the council, and my colleague Joe McPhee, I don't think Joe's here tonight, but he was very much involved with the project. But we were facing different ways, and that's where I was with other people, which I'll mention later on. So I won't be talking much about the process, it's more what actually happened. So this in three parts is sort of. I don't think this had anything to do with my actual involvement in why I was given this project to work on, but I do have personal connections with the castle, because. So that's the first section. Next section, really stories of the castle, more the history, which is important, and then the restoration project. So starting with the personal connections, this is a picture from the mid-50s. The man on the right is my father, who was employed, he was a boat builder in Porterness, and he got a job in the castle as one of the first teachers there of building and construction, which crossed over into navigation quite a bit, and they got this gift of a stoved-in boat called the Clan Macleod, which the few students, with my father's help, of course, fixed up. And that boat actually took students, I think it was 4 students to Malig on a week's trip or something with that. I'm going too much detail now. But so anyway, my dad was working in the college. So, and again, a connection with the castle. As a result of that, my father was actually travelling from Naas every weekend and living in, there were 30 or 32 students living in the castle. It was a residential college, and he was doing sometimes weekend duty as well, but he was basically travelling to Naas in the early days in the 50s. And then we moved as a family nearer the town, and I was born in Coll, went to back school, and I remember the teacher at some stage saying, can you bring in some leaves or branches from trees or something? There were very few trees in the country, so people brought in little bits and pieces, but my father brought in a piece of a monkey puzzle tree, and I think it looked really exotic, which it is, and I remember that as a kind of connection with the castle, which seems a bit tenuous, but these are the little things you remember at that stage. And we used to visit the town on a Saturday very often. We would go to the castle, and my memories of the castle really were the ship models lining the main hall, the main corridor rather, and the smell of linoleum or polished linoleum and so on, and going out the back into the gardens where I seem to remember, maybe correct me, that bees were kept by somebody. So these are kind of vague memories. And then this picture, just finally on this little bit, this turned up, and I think Muriel knows this picture. So the guy on the right, extreme right, is Walter McGowan, who was a boxer, Scottish boxer, world flyweight champion. I think this was taken in front of the castle at a 2 in 1966. And I looked at the photo, very interesting. The man on the left is, I think, Donald Murray, who's my brother-in-law's father, Donald Murray show bust. And the two boys circled are my brother on the left and me on the right. We were stalking Walter McGowan for his autograph, which we eventually got. So another connection. Moving on, just a couple of pictures of Stornoway. Again, I mentioned how the outstanding kind of position of the castle, really almost like the centre of sort of pivotal position. And it's a bit like Oban with its tower, McCaig's tower, on the hill, which a different type of structure, and but they light it up really nicely in most of the year. And you can't imagine Oban without it. You can't imagine Stornoway without the castle. And this little one's a bit. This is a great wee book. Many of you will be familiar with it. Fantastic tales, well told by James Shaw Grant of his attractions. Stornoway. He was a young boy when Lews was around, so he probably borrowed that title from Lews, who had this concentric circles as Stornoway as the hub of the fishing industry and so on. Forgive me. So the next section then, the main section, stories of the castle. This is a bit of a history of the castle. So there's a timeline there which you'll be fairly familiar with. I'm going to really just cover very quickly the Matheson's Castle is what we're really talking about. Built in 1847, right through to the present day. And you had two Mathesons really, the main James Matheson and Duncan Matheson, up to the First World War. The Lews era, 1918 to 24. After Lews, there were actually two trusts, Lews Castle Trust and the Stornoway Trust. And then the Admiralty took over the castle during the war. And then the college started in 1953, but I think the castle was bought by Ross and Cromarty County Council around 1950. I did see a figure that the County Council spent 40,000 on converting the castle, which is about $1.5 million today, just for incidentally. And going forward from the college, the college moved on to new premises in 1975. The current site within the kitchen gardens. But the school continued, the castle school continued until 1988, I think it was, 88 or 88 I think it was, in the castle, when serious defects were discovered, structural defects, where they had to move out and they never moved back in there. Then there was a period really from the mid-90s, there was a partial occupation after repairs. And I should give credit, or just put on record that the former director of Architectural Services, John Patterson, worked very hard to get some money spent on essential repairs. Not a lot of money, but enough. Well, it was probably quite a lot of money at the time, actually. Without these repairs, other things could have happened and we might not be where we are. So I give credit to John Patterson for that. So there was a period of where the building was disused and very much at risk. And then there was the restoration period, which we'll talk about. So there was obviously an original castle in Stornoway, the MacNichol or Nicholson clan, and then Macleod's castle, which is long since gone, but it's probably under the pier there, number 1 pier, and it's known as Stornoway Castle. The first house on the site of the present castle was the Seaforth Lodge, and this map refers to it as Gary Croy, which I think is a kind of English or corrupted spelling of Gary Cruag, which is the kind of site of the castle. There's a bit of that building left, which was discovered during the works in the courtyard of the cafe courtyard of the building, which is I think the storehouse courtyard, as it's called now, just on the right there. So the Mathesons, well, the main figure was obviously James Matheson, made his millions in the East, largely from opium, not entirely, but largely. Retired very early, at the age of 43 or something. He came back and built a castle here. His wife, Mary Ellen, Matheson, right there. Look at Willie. Mary Jane, sorry, yeah. Ellen was somebody else, yeah. Mary Jane Matheson. And he designed, the castle was designed by Charles Wilson, one of the best known and leading Glasgow architects of the 19th century. Glasgow designed much of Glasgow and the park area of Glasgow, the park circus area, and many other, including a lot of free churches, by the way, mainly in the cities and so on. Leading architect. The thing you'll notice about that, apart from its condition, this is in the Stornoway Trust archive, as far as I know, still needing conservation, is that there's no bay window on the left there, which suggests it was not necessarily a Charles Wilson. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. We don't really know. But there's also pencil drawings which you can't see, showing the dining room that was added. So there are quite a few questions about who designed. There were one or two other architects and masons working on it. The records, I think these might have come from I forget if it was from one of the Glasgow museums. And the architects really have very little to work on very often when they're restoring buildings in terms of colour. But these were quite useful. You can see on the left, the main corridor, you can see a little bit of the blue and possibly gold, hence that's the colour that they went for in restoring the ceilings. On the right-hand side is the ballroom in Matheson's time. The conservatories were added in later on in the late 60s, 1860s, I think 1868, and they were really very dramatic and large. And so the main rooms in the castle in the Mathesons' time they were like that, crammed full of stuff. Room in the top left, there is the dining room, which we'll look at how they are now later on, full of portraits and paintings and things, and also the tapestries that are now hanging in the Lady Lever Art Gallery in Port Sunlight. On the right is the library, which was originally the dining room. It's now the yellow library room in the castle as it is now restored. Bottom left is actually it's a drawing room that no longer exists. It's a separate room. This is looking from the window, the front of the castle, towards the corridor, and on your right would be some sort of reception room, which is now the bar, and on the left you go into the ballroom. And I'll flick forward to the next slide. The ballroom looked like the room on the left in Matheson's day, much smaller but a very different style to the Leverhulme ballroom. And on the right is the morning room, which apparently was Lady Matheson's room, really, and very much a spectacular kind of room with the ferns on the wall and the wall painting, which we'll get to later as well. And the right-hand side is actually during Leverhulme's time, the corridor. So what kind of people were they, apart from their great riches and so on? I mean, Lady Matheson set up the school, I think the Scolna Ladies, as it was called, or the female industrial school in Scotland Street. And Keith Street, really, isn't it? Scotland Street, both. I think that's lace making on that picture on the left. On the right are her experimental photos from very early on. She was a photographer, experimenting quite a lot with photography at the time. And the interesting thing about these photos is they are actually in an album in the museum. They're not on display, but they are in the museum, and they're really worth looking at because they are. And this picture on the front, by the way, I know I'm going over my time here. I will accelerate a wee bit because I've got a lot of slides to go through. But that's James Matheson sitting down there in his older age, which puts this. I would guess this. He died in 1878. Willie, is that right? Yeah. So he looks like this is in the 70s, I would say, and that's his wife beside him, and so on. Various the piper is always never far away, and the room down the right, the one down the right, is actually the window of what was the billiard room. You can see two guys holding a cue. And that's earlier, I think. That's must be earlier, unless I've got this wrong. That's James there, and that's his wife. So, and this is another extract from that album, which you must really go and see something, because it's annotated with his comments and then her comments and her replies, and it's really a really interesting thing. So moving on, after Matheson's wife outlived James by about 18 years or so, and then when she died, the castle was passed down through Donald Matheson, a nephew, to his great nephew Duncan Matheson in the middle there, and he was married to Clara from a sort of aristocratic, the right word for an Irish family, and on the right there, that's her maybe a little bit later. I think this is an early photo, maybe the wedding photo. And then the girl on the right is, I think if I'm right, I didn't really check everything that I'm going to be saying tonight because it takes ages to actually be categorical. Stuff that you knew, you have to check again. I'm sure you're familiar with that. But the girl on the right there is, I think she's called Peggy or Ethel. And that's her daughter. And she was one of the girls of the castle that people of a certain generation remembered. And we had a visit from this is Claudia, and I see Tony is there, and her mum's name was Tony. Oh no, he wasn't. No. Anyway, this is the Van der Werfs are called, and that girl you just saw was her granny, and they visited the castle, and they were able to identify the rooms. So they would have been their bedrooms and where their governess would be, and so on. And that's Peter Cunningham on the left, by the way. So there were all these. The project really attracted a lot of interest from people with connections, and I personally found that quite interesting. And other people do as well, I suppose. Next big character was Leverhulme, of course. Lord Leverhulme made his money from soap and palm and related. Again, this is a picture of himself and his wife and his only son, and there are various accounts of Leverhulme, his schemes and his personality and so on. But the one by his son, Leverhulme by his son, is really interesting because I think it's a very honest perspective on this ball of energy that was his father and his poor mother, who I think had something like 5 children that died in infancy. I think she only had one son, according to the family archivist. So Leverhulme had big plans for Stornoway, and his famous drawing. It hangs in the Port Authority, and it was to have a railway station and an art gallery. And just today, I was reading somewhere, I think it was in Jim Grant's wee book, said that the place where the council offices are was going to be a cinema. And so on. So it didn't happen, and there was going to be a bridge across to the castle grounds. Very unlike the Matheson days, where the grounds were really a bit no-go. Again, the castle itself, he did and didn't do a lot to the castle. He did a lot of modernisation. The castle was the first place in Stornoway to have electric lighting, and so he modernised. The plumbing drawings themselves are fascinating if you're a bit of a geek with these kind of things. the room on the left there is the ballroom in his day. He bought the tapestries from the Mathesons as a separate transaction, hung them in the ballroom, and they were hanging there until and he left, and they were moved to Port Sunlight. But when the castle was subsequently, there were panels where these had been hanging, and it wasn't really the best place for them anyway. But anyway, so what was he like? He was one of these people that had about 6 houses on the go at any one time, and the son said, my mother used to say that she seldom experienced the sensation of living for very long in a house free from the presence of workmen. So and the other thing about him is he woke up at 4:30 every morning. He did 20 minutes of exercises, then went into a cold bath, and so he was ahead of his time in many, many ways, including fitness. And he was 67, 68 years of age when he bought the island. This is actually what his bedroom looked like when it was taken apart so it's a room at the top of the first stairs, on the mezzanine, the half landing. That's where he lived, and the staff remember, my own dad remembers, that it had a kind of runnel. I mean, it had I think they took the sides off the dormer, so the rain came in and the wind came in. He slept in that room, and he had one of these open air bedrooms in all his houses. So Leverhulme's time. Again, we had a visit from this lady here, who was the head housekeeper in Leverhulme's time. We had a visit by her grandson, I think it was, some years back. And she got married to this guy on the left, who I think is Andrew McLean, who was Leverhulme's accountant. And the note on the right was a presentation to them of marriage, wedding presents. I think what's interesting about that is just the names. That there's a mix of a lot of local names. I think in the Matheson's time, a lot of the service staff came from other parts of Scotland, and but you can see names there, the Hendersons and Bayfield, and so there's folk memory of the castle in the late Matheson and the Leverhulme era through these kind of people and their families. And I think this picture below here, I think there's a couple of people that would be familiar with. Something tells me that this lady here, this is Leverhulme's sister, by the way, who kept house. Herself, two sisters, I think, used to look after the house. Leverhulme, by the way, James Matheson and Duncan Matheson lived in the castle full time, pretty much. Leverhulme only visited a couple of weeks at a time, 3 or 4 times a year. That was, and for him, it was just an office, really, as much as anything. And there's another picture on the left that was given to me by somebody whose wife's grandfather is in there. I may be wrong, but again, I'm going into too much detail. I think one of these ladies in the front is maybe somebody, a Macleod or something. So if anybody wants to see these later and tell me who they are, I'd be happy. So when Leverhulme, ultimately his plans failed, he moved to Harris, and he gave the trust, he offered the land to the people. So there were actually 2 trusts. There was a Lews Castle Trust, which was the castle, really, and I guess its immediate surrounds. And he had very specific ideas of how it should be used, and municipal and social purposes, and so on. You can read that yourselves. And he gave, £500 for the costs of staying in a castle, for the provost staying in a castle. I believe he stayed once only or something. And I think the trust then there was Stornoway Trust, the larger trust, really in the 20s and so on. They just couldn't really. It wasn't sustainable, and they ended up letting the castle out to sporting tenants, and the main ones that people remember, and they had the castle for year after year, were the Port Arlingtons, Lady Port Arlington. And I think they might have wanted to buy the castle before the war. The rules and regulations on the left, I think these date back to certainly the post-Levyhulme days, with distinct bylaws and so on. And I think some people of a certain age in this room might remember when it wasn't quite straightforward to go when you wanted into the grounds and so on. The Admiralty then took over the castle, requisitioned it during the war, and this picture on the left here somebody in this room could easily date it by the causeway hasn't been built to Goat Island and so on, but it's probably at the end of the war, and there's still buildings on the green. These are possibly allotments that were encouraged, during the war to grow, dig for victory and such like. Tennis courts there, these are Levyhulme's tennis courts that were converted into the Castle College football pitch and so on. On the right, the keys, Sandy Matheson passed this to me, which I then passed to the museum some years back, and it was an airman, I think he was Canadian, it was 46, just after the war, and they were staying in the castle, they were out in the town one night, they came back and he took this key with him to Canada and returned it 40 years later with a note of apology. All these wee stories. The next phase was really the college and the school, and I said before, I think it was 1950 when the building was bought by Ross and Cromarty. Again, this little book here which I bought on eBay because I was told that it existed, was George Thompson, who was the Director of Education for Ross and Cromarty, was a really you wouldn't know it from without being told that he was really very, very influential in driving the residential technical schools. Duncraig was the first one, I think, and then Lews Castle College and so on. Really interesting, the history, full of photos and also the history of the school hostels in Stornoway and in Dingwall and so on. So the work started in the castle, this is just in the 51, I think 52, and converting the castle, so the ballroom was identified as a gym, cinema and assembly hall. And just relating it back to the previous Matheson drawing room, that drawing room was that picture was taken from the window. The light was always behind in the old days in photography. And so this was a drawing room, and this was a much smaller opening. This was enlarged by Levyhulme with columns and beams, and that caused some problems later on. And so he wanted a larger ballroom. Upstairs, second floor, is where the students lived in, and they were, in the early days, they were 15-year-olds. I think I'm right in saying this. They came into the college after second year, and there were 30 or 32 of them living in, as well as, I think the first intake of students to the college in 53 was about 90 or 100 in total. You can see there on the right, the dining room in these early days. I was passed a bunch of photos by somebody on a CD who didn't leave their name some years ago, and I'm still trying to track down who it was. I've got a theory now, but again, if anybody knows, there's half a dozen photos from that period, which looks like it's kind of late 50s, mid 50s, late 50s. Again, so the 56th royal visit, the Queen and Princess Margaret in what was the Matheson's sitting room, if you want to call it that, overlooking Stornoway, now called the Matheson apartment in the college, in the castle. This was a navigation room, and that's the Principal Kenny Smith and his wife. And I suppose the girls of the castle had their socials when they had to dance with the boys, student boys, I think, back in the days. We had, I'll come back to that in a minute. So in the college days and the school days, these rooms really changed dramatically from Levyhulme's ballroom as to how it would have been, should have been. and the dining room. Interestingly, that painting, and there was another one as well, was hanging there during the college and school, I think school days. It's now in the museum collection in the store, and they're sort of 19th century paintings that traveling artists who went to stately houses and painted stuff. And so the students left their mark really in various ways. There's lots of graffiti. This is just a little selection, and I actually collected these when the building was being stripped out by the builders, and under a floorboard there were the various things, and the cod liver oil, which in the early days of the college, the matron used to line them up apparently, and some of the boys apparently used to hold it in their mouth and then go and spit it out, but she then made them all say thank you after apparently. But before I pass on with that, I think the thing about the castle being used as a college, which basically set hundreds, thousands of students onto their career paths, and whether it's building or whatever, or navigation, I think it was a big part of why the castle is so well regarded, really, locally. You know, it's not like it was a stately home, and you know, within the last 10 or 15 or even 50 years. But then it became a building at risk, really, because of the period of the late 80s, even after the structural repairs internally, there were problems, and there was a danger to the public, and the building started to really suffer inside from water penetration. And you can see, I think the architects concluded that this bay window hadn't been tied in properly, was likely to fall out, hence that hoarding, and it had to be taken right down. The main hall, the part of the ceiling had to be taken away to accommodate the. Are you hearing me okay at the back, by the way? Yeah. Part of the ceiling was taken away, so the scaffolding was put up to prop up the tower, or part of it to allow the brickwork to be inserted, and so on. The middle picture is the dining room with a hatch that was put in during the school days, feeding into the kitchens. The right-hand picture is the morning room. Again, the danger of the window of blowing in. This is another shot of the dining room. So the restoration project. What I've just called the restoration project, it's like a new chapter, really. I think it was probably a new council. I mean, there was an effort, a project in the mid-90s and there was a bid to the lottery for funding to turn the castle into a sort of multi-purpose building with, I think, at one stage the library was going to be moving in there, and so on. But the lottery fed back, it refused various things, which and lessons were learned from that, really, in terms of any future bid. You know, working with, they wanted the castle and the grounds to be considered together in many ways, working with the Stornoway Trust, working with other partners, and so on. So that was in the kind of mid-90s, and so really the period we're talking about and that Angus referred to was really from the early 2000s, where there was a new initiative. There was no money, but there was a desire to look again at the castle. Meanwhile, the building was deteriorating, and this working group was given a remit that looked a bit like that. It was a key task, as the council called it, which is the first stage before any money is actually allocated for anything, but it's a step forward. And money was eventually put into the capital programme, $1 million, which was a really key decision by the council, a sort of declaration of intent. And you'll recognise some of the people in that picture on the left, which I think is from 2000 and I can't remember now, 2004 or something like that. The trust was revived as a possible partnership vehicle, really, because that's the way things had gone in some other places where you needed a private partner and the public. So I think public ownership was. There were a few people who came forward from the marketing efforts, and we did quite a lot of advertising and marketing, including locally and talking to businesses and so on in the early days. And we invited, we solicited, not solicited is the wrong word, we had various bids and some people who wanted to buy it, and probably for a song and so on. Angus will remember these things. So lessons learned, engagement. We had an open day in the castle when there were only parts of it accessible, and that was very successful. I think there were 1,000 people there over a few hours, and displaying materials that we had with proposals and so on, and that was very successful. And right through the project, engagement is another big thing for funders, lottery in particular, engaging with community groups and with schools and so on, and so again, and during the building process as well, schools came in and were looking at plasterers working and whatnot. All very important stuff. And we had the staff who used to work in, the domestic staff of the castle. They came to look at their old quarters and so on. And that was, interesting hearing their stories. So all these things, they help the case in terms of how the community regards the building and the project and so on. There were various development proposals when things moved forward. I should have said the council identified some money for a feasibility study, and before the actual £1 million for the capital project. So that enabled us to submit an initial bid to the lottery, which they liked, but they had. Lottery are great to work with in many ways. They're quite demanding, as they should be, and they do help to shape a project in terms of its long-term sustainability and other things. So at one stage, the museum was going to be in the back of the castle, but things move. I'm going to go quickly over the funding because it's not the whole process. It's very involved, and I think the thing I was most involved in many ways was the funding bids and so on, and it's really quite a long and fairly boring. It wasn't boring for me, but it's boring to talk about. We got the money eventually from the lottery. So the lottery plus the council funding was the real start when the thing started gaining a bit of traction with other funders. And the board on the right shows some of these funders. When there used to be EU funding, a bit of that came in, the enterprise company and so on, and eventually the whole thing, when you're up to your knees on Broad Bay in a summer's day or something, and then you're up to your waist, you have to dive in, and I think we were past that stage. So, and it went quite far on before we had the full package to do the upper floors as well, which would involve the private sector partner. And of course then by that stage you've employed project manager and architects, and they produced their proposals. Simpson and Brown, there was a team, led by Malcolm Fraser as architects. This attracted 20 bids from all over Scotland and one Irish bid. So it was a very high profile project really. So Malcolm Fraser and Simpson and Brown, both Edinburgh based. Simpson and Brown did the historic building, the castle. Malcolm Fraser did the new building and the interface between the two. And these are the kind of just some sketches of or these are the sort of reflected plans, the ceilings and the main rooms from Simpson and Brown and so on. And the museum, which looks quite like what was actually built, as it should, because these are fairly late stage drawings. Then construction started on site in 2012, April I think it was, 2012. Probably the biggest scaffolding job that's ever been seen, I guess, in the island. A bit of rock to be removed to create the museum site. So there was work for local builders as well as the main contractors. So the first stage of work involved rebuilding the roof works, replacing the roofs really, or renewing them and repairing them, rebuilding the bay window, and the stonemasons carved the sandstone on site. So just a few shots of the external repairs. You can see the really good slating works and lead works and so on, and at various stages. And Neil Macleod was the local contractor on slating and other works and so on. And I think I was talking to Neil actually just the other week, and he said it was quite a challenging project because they took over from the main contractor on the first phase when the main contractor went bust, and they continued and finished the first phase. But they learned a lot, which they have used in other projects and working with historic buildings and lime work and so on. So it had a great value, I think, for contractors and so on. The picture bottom left is the what it was now the cafe area, the courtyard cafe. It had a big building. There was a toilet block there with a roof that looked like it was bomb-proof. So I'm not sure whether that was military wartime or whether it was actually built when the college. I just don't know, and I've never really kind of bottomed that one out. But that had to be taken away. So you can see it. It was at that point that the window, that the Seaforth Lodge window, was revealed. That wall there is believed to be the surviving part of the Seaforth Lodge. And there's a view of the bay window from the completed bay window, not fully decorated, it's back to bare walls there. So once the external works had been done and bay windows built, it looked a bit like that. The heavy work, really internal repairs. Right-hand room is when the contractor went bust, Patton's, in about November of 2012, and the process of novating, as it's called, the contract over to the subcontractor, Neil Macleod, took a few months over the winter, and the slates had already been taken off. So that room suffered very badly, and it was a total rebuild of that, pretty much, of that room. There wasn't much left. The left-hand corridor is shown there. It was in a bad way. The plasterer's work comes in after the major repairs, and the joiners have done their bit. Behind you can see the panelling, the first stage of the panelling, and I found it really fascinating to watch these guys working. The cornices are run really, with a kind of tin profile on timber, and this is a different thing altogether. And these things are cast really, more of a plaster of Paris type of plaster, and they use these molds and so on. It was fascinating to watch their place up on the first floor. So that's how more or less how the courtyard is now. With you can just see the window on the right, the Seaforth Lodge window, and I think that serves as the link. It does really what it's supposed to do, which is it's got the retail or the wee shop, and it's got the cafe, which serves both the museum customers or users and visitors and castle visitors and so on. So the principle, these are some before and afters of the main rooms. So the ballroom, you can see the way it looked in. This is at a certain stage in early in the kind of repair stage, and then the painting scheme. Well, the architects, the conservation architects, really look at what the kind of schemes, because very often you don't have specific colours. You can only go by what these styles, what people do in other similar houses of that period, and then they can go off into their own areas as well. So I think that was I remember when I saw these drawings, these proposals, thinking they're quite way out, but I think, well, everyone will have a different view, but I think they work Adam's style. And the ballroom, when it's dressed up and ready, it's quite a transformation, really. So you can see, and this is Lews. This is much more. That's Lews' ballroom. So again, some more shots of the corridor and the repair. The first stage of replacing the roof is the joiners work, and then the plasterers come in with a lath, and then they come in with their first coat and second coat of plaster, and so on, and they paint. And then it ends up like that. And a few things were added, historic features. Would read Simpson and Brown designed the lights and so on in that sort of Gothic style, and the carved lions. And the stairs had to be made properly safe. And Ivor Murray's did the intermediate. Every one of these straight ones had to be bent in a certain way, and it satisfied building control, and it looks nice. So this is the dining room. The repairs to the roof of that involved epoxy and some of these big timbers and stainless steel, touch steel here and there. So that's just an indication of this was the biggest single wall that had to be renewed in lath and plaster, and it ends up like that, painted, and the fireplaces were all made by a company down in the border. It specialises in these. That's the library. It's a lath before the plaster goes on, and that's how it finished up, how it looks now. And the morning room, a wee bit of this was discovered some years back, this wall painting, which originally went over 3 of the walls and over the doors. And it was decided to use some of the funding that was allocated for some of the, what they call interpretation things, to actually pay for getting that reinstated. And I think this is members of the society coming. I think Jesse and Ken and Malcolm and other people visited. People took a lot of interest in that. I think that it was worth doing. It's added a lot to that room. And the left-hand one is where this is what was the billiard room. It was initially a family room. I believe it was going to be intended for resident guests. There's now a public room really for use, and the bar on the right, which I think originally was a sort of reception room for guests to the castle in Matheson's day. And in the upper floors, it's the mezzanine area with accommodation, and really in some ways simpler works, less demanding in terms of the plaster work and so on than the ground floor. And they've been transformed and sort of almost like modernized, but still with the historic features in the windows and doors and so on. The furniture is like one of the frequently, well, people might wonder about what happened to all the furniture in the castle, and it's a whole other investigation really, because there's evidence, I mean, in the inventories that they were in the Port Sunlight gallery. And I think they've been copied into the archive in the castle. If you ever want to go and look at them, so there's several inventories. There's one when Lews bought the castle off the Matheson family, room by room, object by object, and this one's quite interesting. There were 26 stuffed stags' heads, and 6 to be retained by the seller because they were the only ones that were shot by members of the family, so that kind of thing. I'll get to the piece of furniture there, but this inventory is the one where when Lews left, the furniture went to different places. Some of it went to Ball Lodge in Harris. Some was left in the castle, in vacant rooms, and then some went to Thornton. I think there was some went to, is that Leverborough? Yeah. Thornton Manor in Cheshire was his main house, which incidentally went on fire last year. So yeah, the furniture, there was really not much left over time. There was a sale of probably the lesser stuff in about 1925 or 26 in locally, and various bits and pieces of furniture do exist in local houses and so on, are still there. This piece of furniture here was in Murdo McLean's shop. It's a hat stand basically for many years, and when the company sadly went out of business, they actually owned that personally and wanted to give it to the castle as a piece, which I think probably was a Lews acquisition. And just to run through, the Museum and Archive was an important and a vital part of the case for funding the castle. The new Museum and Archive under construction, finished, and some nice shots of the exterior, which is weathering very well, I would say. It's and will last a long time. So the museum, the case for the museum was also enhanced by the British Museums. They took an interest in the project again early on by the long-term loan of chessmen. And then it opened, and I think it was the official opening. I did deliberately not put dates in this because I can't remember dates to save myself, but I think it was in 2017. It was actually, yes, it was actually early. No, it was 16, wasn't it? Because the upper floors weren't completed then. That's right, 2016. So that, and these, I just put that picture of the two ladies. This lady is from Naas. She's still around, and they came to the opening as well. This was the opening, not the public opening, which was the year before, 2016, I remember. So there's it in its glory, and the works to the probably called the Parks project, funded by the lottery. That happened after the castle was completed, but it took quite a while to get that through the system. That was funded by the lottery mainly, and the council was involved with Stornoway Trust on that one as well. And finally, a few shots of the building now back in use and back to life, thanks to Christina and her team at the castle for these images. And the way it's become a bit of a popular wedding venue, as it would be. And our own family have been there a few times in the early days. I was thinking, what could I give my brother for his 60th? So a night in the castle was what we did, and it was quite strange, actually. Very nice, waking up in James Matheson's bedroom. Well, it wasn't his bedroom, but his main room, looking over the town. It is quite special, really. And daughter Freya, after she graduated, we took her out there for some photos. And thanks, Lews, for taking that picture, or the main picture. And finally, and I'm just about done, this was her comment to me on her visit when she was in primary 5 or 6. So we'd got special hats for school kids. And suddenly she's 26 and teaching me how to do a PowerPoint again. And going back to the James Frog Grand Prix, I don't know why I put that in. She insisted on that. It's because I said a few things about ultimately having spent so much time with that building, whether it's in and around that building, sometimes on the golf course, very often on the golf course or the rugby field, and my father's connections, everything. It feels like the hub of my own personal universe and so on, so I can relate to it. I wouldn't know how many people to thank for everything, all their contributions, and it includes people like Angus, and who stuck in, it wasn't always an easy sell probably to your colleagues, because it's in Stornoway as much as anything. This is a random selection, and there's a lot of people that contributed to this. And there's Iain Macaulay, the Clerk of Works, and it was a great project to be involved with. I absolutely loved it. it was a great learning experience, and I'm glad I had the chance to do it. So I think that's all I've got to say. So thank you for your patience. Yeah.
Thank you very much indeed, Iain.
How was that for time? I have no idea.
You did very well.
I caught up today.
10 out of 10 for that. It certainly took me back because I kind of lived through the process with you, but not in the intense way that you lived through it, because there were a great many issues and you sort of just swept them aside like that in your talk. But there were many, many issues associated with this project, and we had to dig in many a time and take decisions that were difficult to take, and find money in places that we didn't know where we would find it. It was a very, very challenging project. And one of the memories that I have of it is in the very early days of the project, we were taken up the stone stairs to the roof. And on my Facebook page, there is a picture of me standing on the top of the castle, and we looked down on the roof. You can do that from that point. And at the beginning of the project, the roof looked absolutely dreadful. It really did. It looked like it was leaking like a sieve. And then at the end of the project, I remember we were taken up again to have a look at the roof, and it's beautiful now, absolutely beautiful. And there are so many levels within the roof. It's not just a roof like that, on a house. There are so many levels. It's worth a study all by itself. Fascinating.
Beauty comes in many forms, Angus, isn't it? I'm on your side there.
Okay, that's enough for me. Would anybody like to ask Iain any questions or make a comment?
Good evening, Iain. Thank you very much for your valuable help and insight in this project. It's a credit to the people involved. But I have one question. All provision was made for future repairs, etc. Moving on from this period of time onwards. Was there any provision made for that?
Well, yes is the answer to that. Yes, of course. You have to have maintenance of these buildings, and that's actually that's a really big question. But of course there is, and the lease for the castle, for example, divvies up the responsibility between the council and the tenant of the castle and the council. So, and it's good to see that that's actually happening. I can't say that the grounds are in the state that some of us would like them to see, but the building itself is being maintained. And for example, recently I noticed that the main rooms, some of the main rooms have been painted, and so there is provision for that, and there has to be. But maintenance is vital, really, on any building, and especially this kind of building. I agree with you.
Thank you very much. Maybe you put your thank you very much. Now, who was wanting to come in?
No, it was just to advise.
Oh, sorry, Norman.
Remind Iain of when we first started with Donald Trump in the cafe just down there in the room, because we thought he would. It was one of these things that the golf course next door and the castle, he would put the money into it. But he wasn't interested in one single thing apart from having a round of golf.
No comment.
Yes, please do.
Can I just ask, the Mathesons actually lived here?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
When the Lews came and would just literally have it as a holiday home, how did they travel here? Did they come up on the ferry from Kyle, or did they have their own yacht?
Well, the first thing is that Matheson actually, for all the debit side of his source of his wealth and so on, he put a lot of money into establishing. He basically established what became Calmac, I think, in Hutchison. What's it called again? Hutchison, was it precursor. So he going back to Matheson's day at least. So there was a steamer, I think it came from Kyle, called in at not Gairloch, sorry, Applecross, that's right. So there was steamer service, probably, I don't know if it was I think it might have been 3 times a week or something. And interestingly, I was reading about Leverhulme. He used to come up with these short spells, and again in Jim Grant's book, it's full of nuggets of information. Jim Grant's father was interviewing Leverhulme in the castle about his schemes. He was a reporter for, he was the Gazette, I think, at the time. And just to the way that Leverhulme attended to all the detail, a new engineer was coming up. A lot of the staff and engineers and things, but all from down south, mainly around Liverpool and Wirral and so on. And so there was some sort of telegram or something. Would it have been a phone call then? Did they have phones then? Yes, they did. Yeah, honestly. Anyway, about this fellow coming up all the way from down there, and Leverhulme knew that route well, and he knew that you didn't have any food unless you took your own food. On first opportunity was Aviemore or something like that. So he attended to all these details. So yeah, it was not ferries, but steamer travel. And
anybody else like to say anything? Sorry, Ken.
As a member of the Stornoway Historical Society, I'm very interested in artefacts. One of your slides showed a magnificent piece of furniture, and you referred to Brother Macleod's shop. Where is that piece of furniture at this moment?
It's in the castle, Ken. It's in the castle. It's in the library. I sometimes get mixed up between the rooms because the library, the yellow room, was originally designed as the dining room before the new dining room, the big Gothic dining room, was added. So it's in that room, in that recess, which was designed for that kind of piece of furniture, like a dining buffet. It's got 3 levels on it. So it's in the room. It's possibly the only piece of furniture. I didn't mention the piano, which came a bit later. The piano, I've been doing a bit of research on the piano over a while to see if it survived the Town Hall fire of 1918. Town Hall fire was 18, wasn't it? Yeah. The original grand piano. A piano was presented by the Stornoway Gaelic Choir to the town council. They raised funds for the piano, and it was obtained. And there is a piano shown on photos that George MacDonald, as I think his father took, of the Wido dance band in the early 30s, which looks like the piano. We're not sure, but it would have had to survive the Town Hall fire or have been moved out before the fire happened, because the town hall was occupied by military, it was used by military personnel during the First World War and so on. So I've been into town council minutes going way back and after the new town hall was built and so on. I won't go into the detail, but it's a bit like Beaulieu and the Queen and King's trees. It's not, evidence is hard to find sometimes.
Anybody else? In which case, thank you again, Iain, very much for your talk. It was very good, very interesting. I need to remind you that the next lecture is on February the 23rd, which happens to be my daughter's birthday. But she won't be here for it, unfortunately. It's vintage postcards with Ken Galloway. So we'll look forward to that. And then on March the 30th, the final winter lecture will be Boats Named Stornoway, and that lecture will be given by Colin Tucker. And finally, a plug for Stornoway Gone By. If you haven't got your copy, you can't get one here tonight, but you can get one in local stationers. It's very good. Very good stuff on Stornoway streets. I have one slight problem with Sandy Malleson's article, in that the little bit on Kenneth Street is far too small, because of course Kenneth Street is the most important street in Stornoway. Thank you all very much. Safe journey home.